Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today it is time for another discography ranking video. Today we are going to be looking at the studio albums of the one and only Art Garfunkel. It is amazing to me that we have so many videos on YouTube talking about Simon and Garfunkel, talking about their records, how they would rank and that sort of thing. And we have a number of videos out there on Paul Simon's solo albums and how they would rank, but no one ever thinks of poor Art Garfunkel. Or if they do, they sort of just toss him off to the side as if his material isn't worthy of being talked about. Well, I'm here to sort of right the wrong, as it were, and discuss Art's solo career. Now, worth noting, of course, Garfunkel, one half of Simon and Garfunkel. After the duo split up in 1970, Art went into the film industry for a bit, made a couple of films that actually got good reviews, at least for his acting. And in hindsight, it's kind of amazing that he didn't make a more serious attempt at trying to get into films, but clearly that's not where his passions lay. He ends up coming back into music in and around 1972-73 and starts putting out solo material. Now, after the 70s, which was a pretty prolific time for Art, his solo career has become a lot more sporadic. He's released maybe one record every 7 to 8 years, give or take, for the most part. And some of that, I think, is because, Garfunkel's commercial prospects as an artist, while they were existent for a while, and he did have several major hits in the 1970s, they had more or less dried up by the 80s. On top of that, from a personal motivation standpoint, Garfunkel had gone through some really tough stuff in the late 70s with the loss of his partner at the time, and afterwards with kind of his following marriage and stuff like that and starting to raise kids. I think Garfunkel just wanted to focus on his personal life a little bit more, even as he continued pursuing artistic exploits as they came up. So ultimately what we're left with is a discography that covers a lot of ground, because we're going all the way back to 1973, and Garfunkel actually just put out a record last year, his first record in 17 years. But it's a very sparse discography, so ultimately, to me, in many ways, I think this is actually a very fascinating catalog to discuss, especially because, as far as I'm aware anyways, it has not been discussed to this level on the YouTube platform yet. So yeah, Art Garfunkel. So overall, we have 11 studio albums that we are going to be talking about today. 8 of those are solo records, and then 3 of those are going to be collaborative records. A collaboration with Amy Grant, a collaboration with Maya Sharp and Buddy Mondlock, and a collaboration with his son Art Jr. as well. As far as live records and other releases go, the only live album that Garfunkel has put out is 1996's Across America. I'm going to be very, very honest with you. I have not heard this record, so I don't really have anything to comment on with this. The only thing I'll say is that this era is pretty much kind of the last point where Garfunkel's voice, to me, sounds like it has some sort of fabric of its past self. His voice becomes a lot wispier in the 2000s and that sort of thing, but I think he's still retaining a little bit of power at this point. So in that sense, again, I have not heard it, so I don't know if it is a transcendently good or even a very good record, but it exists. So if you've checked it out, please let me know in the comments below what you think of it. But with that said, we have 11 albums to get through, so let's go ahead and jump on in. At number 11, I have 1986's The Animals Christmas album. Okay, so I did not have great expectations going into this catalog, because I had never heard an Art Garfunkel solo record before jumping into this, not all the way through anyways. And after 5 records, I was feeling pretty good. I actually do like a handful of Garfunkel solo albums a decent bit, which is more than what his reputation sort of would suggest, based off of how a lot of people talk about him anyways. So I was feeling pretty good 5 albums in. And then you get to this one, his 6th, and the train just completely falls off the tracks. And the thing is, there's so much to say about this record. I was not expecting whatever this was to be what it was. It's hard to call this an Art Garfunkel record. This is Garfunkel and Amy Grant working together, contributing vocals for a Christmas-themed conceptual piece based off of a children's book. This is the brainchild of Jimmy Webb, who was a frequent Art Garfunkel collaborator throughout the 70s and 80s. So Art clearly kind of doing his friend a favor and probably genuinely really connecting with the material. Again, all the sort of Christmas themes, very explicit religious themes at points in this music. But man, it is bizarre. It's structured like a classical piece. So clearly this is meant to be a very capital S serious endeavor. And it's not really split up into distinct songs as it is split up into sections. And look, I mean, Jimmy Webb is trying to do a sort of like oratorio type of thing. And I appreciate the ambition. I have a lot of respect for Jimmy Webb as a songwriter. But the thing is, I historically have not had the greatest relationship with rock musicians and pop musicians trying to pivot into classical composing, especially in this type of oratorio format. I am not a fan of Paul McCartney's Liverpool oratorio, for instance. I heard the thing once. I don't really care to hear it again. And this, to me, is far worse because it's not just a bizarre record where the subjects are kind of all over the place and there's a lot of interspersed ideas that don't seem like they mesh well together, but the transitions between the sections are not clean. And when I say that, I don't mean just from a compositional standpoint. I mean the production is all over the place. There's a track called Just a Simple Little Tune on here where Garfunkel's voice just kind of crashes in out of nowhere in this very distracting way. It kind of catches you off guard. Or the track Incredible Fat, where Grant's voice does the same thing. Also kind of awkwardly isolated in the left channel, too, so it makes it kind of even more disorienting. And yes, by the way, one of the songs on here is a track that is called Incredible Fat, about a cat named Incredible Fat, just to give you a sense at the level this record is operating at. There's also a lot of children's choir on here, which is not a recipe for enjoyment for me personally. There's a lot of it. It's not very good. And overall, it's just this kind of bloated, ambitious, but all over the place. And it's a record that maybe with the right direction could have been an odd curiosity, but that is still reasonably enjoyable. And this is definitely an odd curiosity, but I don't think the execution is there at all for my tastes. I think Garfunkel's voice and Grant's voice, like, they are fundamentally fine on here, but they are not deployed well. So I don't really want to blame Garfunkel for this record being, in my opinion, pretty bad. I think this is very much a production thing, a Jimmy Webb thing, whatever you want to call it. But either way, the Animals Christmas album, which, by the way, I spent a very long time thinking that was like an Animals collaboration with the rock band The Animals. So when I actually looked up what this was, I was very taken aback. Not a good album, in my opinion. Pretty easily the worst thing in this catalog. And unfortunately, we're getting to some other records that I don't like very much, but this thing is kind of a special little oddball. Check if you're curious. It's a trip, but yeah, could not be anything else. The Animals Christmas album, my number 11. At number 10, I have 2007's Some Enchanted Evening. Kind of after that first record, I'm going to be very honest. There's a lot of albums in this list where I'm not going to have a whole ton to say about them going in. Garfunkel really operates in this very consistent adult contemporary space, which is part of why people don't really want to explore his catalog, I suppose. And I still think it's worth doing, but sometimes there's not a whole lot to say about things. Now, that said, I thought this record was going to be better than it was. You know, it's Art Garfunkel. Yes, he's in his late 60s at this point, but, you know, tackling jazz standards. It feels like a pretty safe recipe for success, especially relative to some of the other records that he had put out in the preceding decades. But boy, I did not care for this. I was actually pretty disappointed by it. It's a record that's not even on streaming services at all, and it's not even on YouTube. The only way I heard it was because I happened to own a CD copy of it that I found in a bargain bin for like $2. Yeah, not into this at all. It kind of reminds me of the record Lefty from like 20 years before at this point. In how synthetic sounding it is. And the fact that I'm comparing a record made in 2007 to one made in 1988 should probably tell you that that synthetic sound also sounds pretty dated. It just, very little. I know there are legitimate acoustic instruments playing here, and there are like real orchestras and real people playing these instruments, but man, a lot of it sounds like this was just programmed on a synthesizer. Credit, or lack thereof, I suppose, to Richard Perry on this one. The recently departed Richard Perry, rest in peace. But yeah, I don't think this record sounds very good. And Garfunkel's voice is really showing its frailty here as well, which could work in the right context. I think of like a Paul McCartney Kisses on the Bottom type of thing, where I think the older voice kind of has its charm in that way. But Kisses on the Bottom is a record that has a lot of life and a lot of natural energy to it, and this record has neither of those things. It was a drag to get through. I would say the most exciting thing about Some Enchanted Evening, the most interesting thing about it, is there's a piece of audio from the sessions for this record that goes viral on YouTube every so often, and you can hear Garfunkel talking to like the producers or whoever is recording him, and people make fun of it because Art sounds very like erudite on there and pretentious. And some people think he just sounds like an asshole, and I wouldn't go that far, but it's kind of amusing to hear him like come up with this very like culinary critic level of description for how he's trying to approach his vocals and how he's trying to tell these stories. It's interesting, and I want to respect that, but it's also kind of funny. Anyways, that clip is a lot more interesting than this record, for my money. Some Enchanted Evening, my number 10. Don't go out of your way to get this on CD. It's not really worth your time. At number 9, I have 1988's Lefty. The aforementioned Lefty. As I said, very synthetic record. Very, very late 80s adult contemporary energy here with the keyboard and guitar sounds and things like that. And it's fine. There's very little here that I would characterize as being offensively poor or anything like that, with one exception. But for the most part, this record just kind of lives in a very sleepy sort of adult contemporary territory that doesn't feel like it cares to be more energetic than what it is. There's a rendition of When a Man Loves a Woman on here that is the most sort of zonked out, quiet, feeble rendition of the track you will ever hear. Not a highlight for me by any means. And the track King of Tonga on here is the worst thing ever put to tape. And that isn't actually true, but when you hear the song, you will believe it. I think by far the worst individual song of any of their catalogs, the Garfunkel, the Simon solo catalog, the Simon and Garfunkel catalog. I think this is the worst thing. And that's taking into account that there's a track where Paul Simon says racial slurs. So that's saying something. For the most part, again, this is relatively inoffensive, though, apart from that one song. But it's bland. There's no high points, nothing on here that I would come back to, I don't think. It just sort of operates in a very sleepy sort of zone, I suppose, and I have nothing else to say about it, really. Lefty by Art Garfunkel, my number 9. At number 8, I have 1997's Songs from a Parent to a Child. Now, based off of the title and based off of the artwork and things like that, this would seem ostensibly to be a children's album, and I guess it is, but it retains the adult contemporary sensibilities of his last few efforts without really much change. Like, a lot of these songs sound like they could have been on Lefty and would have worked just fine. And there is, I think, yes, there are tracks that I think work well in the sort of like lullaby sort of context that would be appropriate to play for a kid, like Morning is Broken or Baby Mine or Dreamland or something like that. But there's some other like interesting tracks that I think it's cool to kind of hear him try out. I Will, for instance. Really nice to hear Garfunkel try to do that song, for instance. Now, that said, there's also a cover of Good Luck Charm by Elvis Presley on here that features Art's son singing. And you know what? It's charming and it's cute, and it's nice that, you know, they had that special moment together. It's also something that has no business being released by a professional label. This is not a child prodigy type of situation, and I think that's all I want to say about it, I think. But again, there's still some moments on here that I think are as good as some of the best moments of his previous couple of records, for sure. Lasso the Moon, I think, in particular, is one that stands out as a highlight, one of his most affecting later period vocals overall, for sure. And again, you know, his voice works well in this context, I think. So it's passable. It's nothing on here is nothing here offends my taste, I suppose. It is fairly safe, fairly straightforward. Not a whole lot to complain about on here, but it is also, again, I think, a pretty completely unremarkable album. Songs from a Parent to a Child, my number 8. At number 7, I have the most recent record, 2024's Father and Son. I have a lot of thoughts about this album. His first record in 17 years, as I said before. A collaboration with his son, who, Art Garfunkel Jr., has sort of made a name for himself in Germany as a guy who, you know, performs over there, records albums. He recorded an entire record of Simon and Garfunkel covers in German. So that kind of tells you like what his approach is. And he is a fine singer. I would not say he's anything beyond that, but he's fine enough. And this record is a collection of the two of them duetting over a bunch of songs, both older songs and a slightly more recent, and by more recent I mean like 80s songs, like Here Comes the Rain Again, for instance. That's about as contemporary as you get. But you also have standards like Blue Moon, and then like 60s tracks like Blackbird and things like that. There's one Simon and Garfunkel song on here, Old Friends, but that's it. It's not very good. The vocal tuning on here is really bad, certainly at points, and it's very noticeable throughout the entire record. And Art definitely has, Garfunkel has definitely declined as a vocalist, which makes sense. He's in his early 80s. I don't think you could probably expect much more than what he gives here, but he still sounds extremely frail throughout the whole thing. The track Once in a While, in particular, with the heavy layers of vocal tuning and sweetening that are going on, he sounds positively inhuman at points. It sounds pretty poor. And they do the same thing with Art Jr.'s voice, even though he probably doesn't need it. But the thing I was not expecting with this record is the very dramatic, cinematic, like film score orchestral arrangements going on in the background. I was not prepared for how loud this thing is, and how just, again, it sounds like something you would hear in like a movie theater during a dramatic scene, and it's every damn song that does that. And it doesn't work. Neither of their voices can handle an arrangement that strong. It sounds out of place. It's a thoroughly bizarre record, a thoroughly strange album. And yet, there is something very affecting about this that I can't really pinpoint, but something that I like and that I kind of cherish about this thing. And maybe it comes from that aforementioned frailty in Garfunkel's voice, but the entire thing feels like a passion project. It feels earnest. It feels like the two of them deciding, you know what, we want to make music together while we still can. And it does in a way feel like a sort of final goodbye to a loved one, I suppose. It feels like Art Jr. in a way saying goodbye to his dad. And I don't know, once I started thinking about that, and I'm not sure at what point it was, maybe it was like close to the end, maybe it was the title track that closes the record. But then I was like, despite all the weird quirks with this thing, I'm kind of inclined to like it a little bit. There's a lot that is strange. There's a lot that's bizarre about this thing, but I have an affection for it that I can't really deny, and I still can't say I entirely know where it comes from. But it moved me a little bit, I think, and for that reason alone, it gets my number 7. A thoroughly bizarre record that I would recommend listening to. I cannot imagine we're going to get another Art Garfunkel record, so this will probably be the last one. But check it out and let me know what you think if you do, because I feel like people will have a lot of thoughts on it. At number 6, I have 1979's Fate for Breakfast. So after the first 3 Art Garfunkel records, this is the one where he starts to lose me a little bit. It's still fundamentally, I think, a decent album. Still some good bits of songwriting on here, some good performances on his part. His voice still sounds great. I think my problem with Fate for Breakfast is that the production here seems to be getting in the way a bit more. I think on the previous records, the production was fitting for the material, and here I think it gets a little bit overblown. Not to say this record doesn't have plenty of good moments, as I said, but I do think it is a bit more overwrought than the ones before it, and I think that hurts it a little bit. Still some decent tracks. I like In a Little While, the opening track, well enough. I think the track Miss You Nights on here, that closes side A, that's a moment where I do think that the sort of bombastic nature of the arrangements actually serves the song a little bit. But for the most part, I think the fuller production here is... I don't think that it takes away from anything necessarily, but I don't necessarily think it serves the songs or Garfunkel as a vocalist as well as it could. So in that sense, I think it has some of the same strengths as the previous records as far as like the material that he's covering and things like that. Although there's a noticeable lack of Jimmy Webb involvement compared to the previous records, which is unfortunate. I think, again, Garfunkel and Jimmy Webb work really well together. But again, nothing bad here. I would say this is solidly decent, and just not necessarily the Garfunkel record I would start with. Fate for Breakfast by Art Garfunkel, my number 6. At number 5, I have 1981's Scissors Cut. It's interesting because this record I think has a lot of the same things that I pointed out as negatives on Fate for Breakfast, but I think it works a little bit better in this context. This record is a little bit more ballads heavy than Fate for Breakfast was, and in that sense, it sort of gives off this very morose vibe that fits pretty well with what Garfunkel's own life was at the time. Again, keep in mind that his girlfriend at the time had just taken her own life like a couple years prior, and he was dealing with a lot of understandably trauma and depression and things like that as a result of that. So in a sense, I think the sonic palette of Scissors Cut works well when you know that context. Maybe it wouldn't work as well without it, but I can't really speak to that. And there's some good songs. I think the opening track, A Heart in New York, is a pretty effective one. Again, it's one where the production and the decisions to throw in like sound effects and things like that almost get in the way of the track a little bit for me, but I think it still works pretty well. And I really like the track Can't Turn My Heart Away on this record. I think it's one of his most tender vocals overall, really getting into his falsetto, and it's nice. You don't hear Art get into his falsetto a lot with the duo, but he does that a number of times in his solo career, and I do like it when he does. I think he has a nice falsetto. But yeah, some solid songs. The title track, I would say, is also another highlight on here, probably. Again, it's not reinventing the wheel, but at this point, we're far beyond, I think, the material at the bottom of this list, which was mediocre adult contemporary, and we are now getting into like really solid adult contemporary, I think. Fundamentally strong songs, production that at this point I think is really starting to serve the songs a little bit more, and Garfunkel as a vocalist, always I think the highlight of these records, just sounds great, gives the material a little bit more feeling and engagement than a lot of other vocalists would. And that's what keeps the quality floor on these being pretty high from here on out. So Scissors Cut, my number 5. Interesting listen. Maybe not a great album per se, but I think worth your time. At number 4, I have 2002's Everything Waits to Be Noticed. If we're talking like revelations in this Art Garfunkel discography dive, this was it. By the time of this record, I had pretty much given up hope that I was going to enjoy any of these anymore, which is not something I like saying, not something I like admitting to, but it seemed like kind of we were getting to that point where the artistry and the vocal ability was not quite as prevalent as it used to be. But this record shocked me. And by shocked me, I mean, I think it's like a pretty damn good record. I don't think it's earth-shattering, but it's still solid. The big thing here is that this is a collaboration between Garfunkel and Maya Sharp and Buddy Mondlock. Buddy Mondlock had written for Garth Brooks and Janis Ian, among other people. Maya Sharp had worked with people like Cher and the Chicks before. You know, these are people who had careers of their own, but were also relatively accomplished songwriters at that point. And so Garfunkel pairing with them also encourages him to start writing material of his own, something that he doesn't really do even on his other solo records. He co-writes 6 of the songs on this record, and they are co-writes, but still he is an active part of the writing process. And the material here, it sounds organic. And it sounds organic in that early 2000s kind of like, you know, compressed way, I suppose. But it's refreshing. It's refreshing after the very kind of synthetic, as I've been talking about, keys heavy approach to recording music that his other albums were really just not inspired to deviate away from. I think it's not an adventurous record, but I think Garfunkel working with these younger folks is helping him get out of his comfort zone here. It has a bit more life to it, even if it's still like a pretty damn like clean record aesthetically. I think there's relatively a number of solid songs. I think Crossing Lines is good. The title track is pretty good. I enjoy Perfect Moment and How Did You Know. It works well. It never, again, I don't think I could point to a track that floored me on here from a songwriting perspective. And the other thing too is that you have 3 songwriters and 3 vocalists on here, and I don't think the vocal blend ever really like registers for me as being impressive. It's never more than, I think, relatively good. But I do think that Garfunkel vocally, who is again starting to show his age at this point for sure, I think it works well. The production puts him in a position to succeed. He sounds nice in a very delicate sort of way. And I do think the other 2 complement him reasonably well. So yeah, if it's not a ringing endorsement for this record, I'll just say again, I was surprised that there was any late career Art Garfunkel records that I was really drawn to, but this one surprised me. It came at the right point of his discography to where it made a really positive impact. And honestly, yeah, I would recommend it. It's probably not much better than your average like 2000s singer-songwriter fare, that sort of thing. But Everything Waits to Be Noticed, Art Garfunkel, Maya Sharp, Buddy Mondlock, it's pretty good stuff. And again, cool to hear Garfunkel in the context of being a songwriter. So yeah, check that one out. At number 3, I have 1973's Angel Clare, his debut record. So let's start with the following. Let's just start with the negative to get out of the way. There's a children's choir in the track Wo Ya Ya, that I don't like one bit. So let's throw that out there. Now that the negativity is out of the way, this is a very nice pop record, and a really nice way, I think, to open his solo career. The song selection here is honestly, in some ways, maybe the strongest, like, you know, pound for pound selection of songs of any of these records, even if it's not my favorite cohesive whole. And the arrangements here of these tracks are really, really high quality. You have a mixture of songs that are more kind of traditional and a mixture of songs that are contemporary as well. So you have like your traditional tracks like Down the Willow Garden, Barbara Allen, things like that. But you also have tracks like Paul Williams' Traveling Boy, which opens the record. Again, another one where I would almost go so far as to say the arrangement is overwrought at points. There's a couple of those moments on this record, and maybe that's what keeps me from ranking it even higher. It's that sometimes it gets so bombastic that a little bit too bombastic for its own good. It feels like some of these tracks are trying to give, Art Garfunkel, like you're trying to give him like that bridge over troubled water turn very explicitly at points, and I don't think that works. Like I don't think he ever comes close to approaching that magic again. But again, the core song strength I think makes up for those moments where I don't think the production serves Art super well. And Traveling Boy I think works really well for the most part. My favorite rendition of any of the songs on here though is Randy Newman's Old Man. I think that Garfunkel's voice paired with that song is a really, really excellent match. I think it's a really great cover on Art's part. It's a strong album overall. Again, strong sort of early 70s adult contemporary material. Again, a couple records that I think are a little bit more consistent than this one, but I don't think you can go wrong. And with Angel Clare as a starting point, I think it's a neat transition in some ways from some of the stuff that he was doing with Simon and Garfunkel. And yeah, I think it's solid. Angel Clare, Art Garfunkel, my number 3. At number 2, I have 1977's Watermark. This is almost my number 1, and honestly, after more listens, it might end up just getting there. I think if nothing else, it's like the closest thing to like a quote-unquote thematically consistent Art Garfunkel record that we have. This album is predominantly made up of Jimmy Webb tracks. Again, as I've said a few times, Garfunkel recorded Jimmy Webb songs over a number of albums that he put out in the 70s and 80s and so on. But here is the one where he kind of dedicates an entire record, more or less, to the oeuvre of this singular songwriter. And boy, I think it works really, really well. I think this record is pretty great, honestly. I think it starts well with Crying in My Sleep. I think Marionette is pretty good. But there are two highlights that really stand out to me here. One is the title track, which might be my favorite solo Art Garfunkel song, and genuinely one I would like recommend to anybody, because the like production techniques that they're doing on here and the way they're deploying the instruments feel unbelievably modern. Like you could hear like a 2020s indie folk track using some of these same sonic ideas with like guitar tone and how they're mixing the piano in between everything as well. Like, this song is arranging instruments in a way that a lot of modern tracks do themselves. And in that sense, it feels like it transcends eras. It feels remarkably fresh. I was really honestly shocked at how good this thing is. The other track that I really like quite a bit is the song Mr. Shuck and Jive. Excuse the reference there. I know it's a little bit racialized, although I think the song itself doesn't necessarily racialize it, but the title in itself is anyways, I digress. It's a really good song. It's a great song about, kind of someone, I guess, like, a blowhard, I suppose, someone who never accomplished anything in life, but sort of, is a bag of hot air and brags about, how much they could have done or that they did do, but they don't have any proof for it, that sort of thing. And Garfunkel's lower register gets a nice workout in that song. All relative, of course, he doesn't have a very low voice, but it's nice to hear that warmth and a little bit of that heaviness there. It sounds terrific. The bit in the middle with the scatting is the one part I don't like about this particular arrangement of the song. It gets a little bit corny, but man, I think it's otherwise really sharp. One of my favorite Art solo vocals here, I think, and definitely worth checking out in that sense. But yeah, across the board, there's not much here that doesn't work for me on some level. I think it is sonically not quite as singular, I suppose, as the number one record, which is why it doesn't quite get to that for the purposes of this list. But I think song for song, pound for pound, this is very, very strong. And in some ways, maybe the Art Garfunkel record I would personally recommend starting out with first. Especially because I think if people have heard any Garfunkel solo record, it's probably the first two. They probably heard one of those because they picked it up in a bargain bin of LPs at some point. But this one, I think, you know what, is worth actually a lot more hype than it gets. I think it's genuinely a very strong kind of late 70s pop album. And yeah, Watermark. My number 2 Art Garfunkel solo record. And at number 1, I have 1975's Breakaway. This is my favorite Art Garfunkel solo record, and I think I was talking about the production being very singular on this album. And I don't mean in the sense that it is singular across all of popular music, just in the sense that this record has a vibe, a distinct sound that none of the other records really have because they're all much more anonymous. And granted, that sound is like Fender Rhodes, like electric pianos. They are all over this thing. If you're familiar with the Paul Simon record from the same year, Still Crazy After All These Years, the two records are operating in a very, very similar sonic palette, and that is emphasized by the fact that the track My Little Town, the Simon and Garfunkel reunion song, appears on both albums and fits in pretty damn neatly on both of them. But that, that sound, which, again, it sounds dated and in a certain context can sound cheesy, I think actually really works here. And I think this record actually has an interesting element of melancholy to it that maybe you wouldn't associate with Garfunkel's solo material, but I do think the record cover actually evokes. I think it is an album that gives off the vibes of its cover in a very accurate way. It starts with the rendition of I Believe, When I Fall in Love It Will Be Forever. Another one of my favorite Garfunkel solo vocals. I think it's a great arrangement, great performance from him just in general. And it kind of doesn't let up after that, I suppose. You're just pass through all these like really interesting interpretations of tracks like Ragdoll, which I think Art does a great job on that song. The title track is really strong. I think the rendition of the Beach Boys' Disney Girls is pretty good. And I really like the Flamingos cover on the B-side, I Only Have Eyes for You, as well. It's sonically very consistent, but I don't think it ever sounds flat to me. I think the sort of, saloon atmosphere, but like not leaning too hard into those tendencies, is pretty captivating. Is a captivating vibe for an Art Garfunkel solo record. And when you mix that with his vocal performances, which are really strong, and the core songs that he's singing over, you get an album that is just, I think, a captivating sort of next-gen Great American Songbook type of approach, I suppose. Like, I'm imagining him doing Great American Songbook tracks with this type of arrangement, and thinking about that almost, frustrates me more about how completely underwhelming I thought his Great American Songbook record was. Imagining him doing that type of vibe in this era with this voice, I think would have been truly outstanding. So this is the closest we get to that. And I suppose the note that I want to leave on is, I think that is the lens to view Garfunkel through. He's not, he is an impressionist, and he is a vessel for songs, an interpreter of songs, more than anything else. He's not someone who is necessarily going to have the same artistic vision and singularity as a Paul Simon, let's say. Not working on that level as a songwriter. But there's definitely a strong intentionality to how Garfunkel delivers a vocal, to how he chooses songs. I mean, he has a very, very strong hand in his song selection by all accounts. So this is not him being just thrown songs to record, essentially. He plays a big part in that process. And so I'm thinking about him as this, sort of, 70s pop equivalent to like a crooner or something like that is the way to go about it. And I think if you take it and look at it through that lens, and you don't devalue the importance of that, because I don't think you should devalue the importance of that. We don't devalue Frank Sinatra for not writing his own songs, right? I think if you look at it through that lens, you'll find that Garfunkel's solo career, at least the early part of it, has quite a bit to offer. And even if he does seem to kind of lose focus after a point, probably in part for reasons that are very understandable, that any of us could understand, personal trauma, depression, that sort of thing. The talent is there, the skill is there, the ability is there, and I think there's a lot of intention there that I think just deserves to be recognized more and appreciated more. So check out Breakaway if you haven't, and if you have and you were underwhelmed because you were expecting, I don't know, Simon & Garfunkel 2.0, listen to it again with a little bit of an altered lens, because I think you will find that heightens your appreciation for it. And hopefully you'll grow to perhaps not be as averse to the idea of Art Garfunkel as a solo artist as many of us are. And you know what? If this video can make Garfunkel less of a meme, less of a joke in some people's eyes compared to Paul Simon anyways, then I would say that's a job well done. Breakaway, my #1 Art Garfunkel record. All right, so I want to know in the comments below what your favorite Art Garfunkel solo record is, what your favorite solo song of his is. Have you heard any of these records before? Are you intrigued to check any of them out, either because you think they sound great or because you're just sort of morbidly curious about them? I want to hear about all of that in the comments below. Again, we just had the Simon & Garfunkel video earlier in the week, so please make sure to watch that. Paul Simon video coming out on Friday, so look forward to that as well. And with that all said, thanks a lot for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more discography rankings and videos are to come. Make sure to hit that bell for notifications and tell a friend as well. Thanks a lot, and I will see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.